Greg, happy Sunshine Week to those like you and I who celebrate, and welcome to New Mexico in Focus.
Thank you very much for having me. We really appreciate you recognizing Sunshine Week. We think it's really important, and I'm happy to be here.
Good. Let's get going then. I would like to begin our conversation sort of broadly by reading from the State Inspection of Public Records Act, which you and I know as IPRA. The law says the legislature intended that everyone is, quote, entitled to the greatest possible information regarding the affairs of government and the official acts of public officers and employees. Doing so, the law continues, is an essential function of a representative government. That is some high-minded stuff, Greg, and my question is, how are we doing in terms of living up to that in 2026?
I think we're doing pretty well, but it's a daily battle, right? Transparency is so important to democracy and to government. If people don't have faith in what's going on in the government or access to what's going on, then it's really detrimental to society as a whole. I think we're doing pretty well as a state. New Mexico, our public records law, IPRA, is really good. It's very public friendly. The problem is there's always efforts to minimize what we can get and how fast we can get it. And we've seen some efforts in the legislature in the last couple of years to limit what we can get and how fast we can get it. And so we're always fighting the battle.
That's a great transition. Let's get to a couple of those recent battles that you guys have been fighting. We covered a couple of bills on this show last year that sought to sort of limit IPRA. Neither of those bills passed, of course, but one remnant did survive, and we'll get to that in just a moment this year. Backing up a bit, what is driving this desire to quote unquote rein IPRA in?
I think what's driving it is something that has happened over the last few years, which is that the number of requests, public records requests to public entities has really increased. There's really no dispute that there are a lot more demands made on records custodians, public entities, to provide public records. And so it has, in some circles, said, you know, we're getting so many requests, we should limit what's available, or we should make it more difficult to get records. We think that's the opposite approach because, as the legislature said, providing public access is a fundamental duty of public entities. And so if there are increased demands on public entities to produce records, the result is not, the goal is not to limit the access. The goal is increase the number of records custodians, increase their funding, increase their training. Let's meet this increased demand with an increased supply. Let's make it more, let's give the records custodians more tools to meet these requests and make sure that the public is not the victim in this kind of increase in records requests.
Let's burrow into that just a little bit. The idea that the volume of records requests is increasing is undeniable.
Right.
It's a real thing. It's really happening. My first question is FOG sympathetic to that perspective, to that argument, just as sort of a general principle?
We're very sympathetic to that because IPRA is only as good as the records custodians. Public access is only as good as what these people who work very hard can actually provide. And so we're sympathetic that when their email boxes get fuller and their requests get greater, that it's more difficult for them to do their jobs. But what we can't do is, in response to that, is create barriers to access. We can't make it more expensive to get records. We can't make it take longer, because those are the things that completely undermine the idea of transparency. A good comparison is the federal FOIA, Freedom of Information Act. If you've ever tried to use FOIA,
I have, Greg.
it's a bureaucratic nightmare, right? And every request takes years, takes a lot of money, to the point where the act becomes nearly worthless to people who really want government information. We want to make sure in New Mexico that that's not what happens, that we don't create a system where these records custodians are so overburdened and underfunded that they can't do their job, which is to provide timely information without barriers.
And transparency is a public policy choice, right? And does that create a situation where it's kind of a put your money where your mouth is thing?
So every politician likes to run on a pro-transparency platform. Everybody wants to say, I'm the most pro transparent governor or mayor or school board president. In practice, though, there are a lot of people that want to keep this aspect confidential, this record quiet. And so you have to, in practice, every day say, we're going to do whatever we can as a government to make sure that we're going to make these records as available, as quickly, and as cheaply as we can.
Let's talk for a moment about that remnant that I mentioned a moment ago from those couple of IPRA bills that died during the session last year. One of those remnants was a task force to, quote unquote, study IPRA implementation, which ultimately passed this year as, I believe, House Joint Memorial 2. Greg, tell me a little bit about that task force. Who's going to be on it? What are the timelines for it? And what is that studying going to look like?
So that came out of the bills that you mentioned, which were introduced in 2025, which really, some of the bills suggested some really substantial changes to IPRA that made transparency advocates really nervous and really concerned about access. And the approach that was agreed on, rather than passing these bills, was let's take a little bit more time and let's study this a little more closely to see what all the ramifications are going to be. And one of the things that came out of it was this task force. It was the result of this House Memorial, and it's going to have people that are in the records production business, like people from the counties and other governmental entities. It's going to have transparency advocates like FOG and
the Press Association.
The Press Association, the ACLU, people who understand and are always fighting for access. It's going to have both sides of the table. And the purpose, the Attorney General's office is going to be involved as well. And the purpose is, let's look at these issues of increased demand and increased burden on records custodians and see what are the solutions, and make sure that in creating those solutions that we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, that we suddenly put up such burdens to access that IPRA has its legs cut out from under them. So we want to make sure that what comes out of this task force is not necessarily changes to IPRA. What we'd like to see are ways that we can help the records custodians do their jobs better, which is streamlining electronic access, increasing funding to their offices so that they can hire more people, more staff. There's been a lot of work done by some records custodians in terms of making records available online so that their individual search time is a lot less. So I think the task force is an interesting idea. We're glad to be a part of it. And we want to make sure that the end result is not legislation that really undercuts what the legislature has already said is fundamentally important, which is quick access to records.
Greg, anytime the legislature gets near IPRA, it makes me incredibly twitchy as someone who favors transparency. This is, after all, the legislative body that exempted many years ago its own emails from IPRA. It sounds like a lot of what FOG does in terms of the way the legislature approaches IPRA is to play defense. Am I understanding kind of your role a little bit on that task force that way?
Yeah, there's no question. So New Mexico is really fortunate. We have a very good pro-transparency statute. If you look at state laws from around the country, New Mexico's IPRA is really good in terms of providing access and providing it quickly and without too much cost. Every year there are bills that try to erode that a little bit. There are never pro-transparency changes to IPRA that are suggested. It's always, let's make this record confidential. Oh, let's exempt this.
Or narrow those exceptions.
Let's make sure it's a little bit tighter. Sometimes there's good reasons. We've had changes to IPRA that have to do with victims of crimes that are a good thing, and we recognize that that's a policy balancing. But generally, as you said, our job as transparency advocates is to make sure that the legislature doesn't go too far, that the concerns of records custodians and the government and people who are in that system who may have reasons to keep things quiet and aren't as interested in transparency, we want to make sure that doesn't overcome this fundamental access.
Gotcha. I want to get to sort of a new player on the transparency scene, and that's going to be artificial intelligence. I noted a recent study from the city of Albuquerque, and more specifically the city clerk, Ethan Watson, who has become sort of one of the leading voices in the Let's Reform IPRA movement, is what I'd like to call it, who kind of made the media rounds recently and presented what I think, at least I'd never seen this before, a novel argument that might explain that volume increase that we've been talking about. What he said was that the majority of the city's requests are now coming from out-of-state data scrapers or suspected artificial intelligence bots overseas. As such, Watson argues the law has become unworkable. What do you make of that argument?
Well, it's interesting. And it's new. And like you said, this is kind of the first we're hearing of AI having any role at all in access to public records. There's no question that part of this increase in records requests over the last few years has come from what we might call commercial users, which are people that have a need for public records, but then they use them for commercial purposes. They republish them in some form, or they create their own database out of it.
Mugshots.com.
Exactly. There's all kinds of YouTube channels and things that use police camera footage and things like that. That is an increase. And what the city of Albuquerque is reporting is that they believe that some of these are AI created, and that is a factor in the number of requests that they get. We're going to have to flesh that out a little bit because this is brand new.
I was going to say, have you seen any evidence to support that claim?
If they believe that fact based on what they've looked at, I don't have anything right now to say that's not true, but I don't know how widespread it is. I don't know exactly how big of a burden it's creating on them, but it's certainly worth considering and talking about, but we have to be very careful. IPRA doesn't limit who can ask for records. IPRA has never said, has never allowed the government to ask a requester, why do you want this information and what are you going to do with it? The whole idea behind transparency is your reason for asking for it is irrelevant. The point is it's the public's records, and anyone who asks for it should be able to get it. We understand that the more records requests there are, the more burden there is, and that slows down the ability of other citizens to get access to records. So I guess I'm always a little bit skeptical. That's my nature in this job, to be a little skeptical of the records custodians and the governmental entities when they talk about burden. But I do believe what they're saying, and we do have to take it seriously. We just have to make sure that in taking those issues into consideration, we don't undercut IPRA, which is to provide as much access as possible.
Greg, I've always appreciated your skepticism on this front. Let's spend a quick moment here at the end on our state's other sunshine law, the Open Meetings Act, which folks like you and me refer to as OMA. It's having a bit of a moment lately itself. One example I can think of is the kerfuffle over the Doña Ana County Commission's approval of $165 billion in industrial revenue bonds for the Project Jupiter data center. Another happened just earlier this week when the Otero County Commission, in a 12-minute emergency meeting, approved a brand new contract for immigrant detention with ICE. I want to ask the question a bit more broadly, though. One thing to have access to records, another to be in the room when big decisions get made. What happens when that law starts to erode?
You know, the Open Meetings Act is about the most simple statute we have. All it does is require public bodies like school boards and city councils and county commissions to say, tell us when you're going to have a meeting, tell us what you're going to talk about at the meeting, and do your votes in public. That's basically all it is. Mm-hmm. There's more to it. There's some exceptions to it, but that's basically all it is.
But if you're going to shut the door and keep me out of it, you got to explain why you're doing that.
You have to do it in very limited circumstances, and you have to explain why. And if you're going to have a meeting under emergency circumstances or on short notice, it again has to be under very limited circumstances, and there has to be a very pressing need. That's what's at issue in Otero County. When they had this emergency meeting about contracts with ICE, they had an emergency meeting, and the question is, was that appropriate? Because it did have the effect of shutting the public out, because the public really didn't know about it. And so the Open Meetings Act is a very easy act for people to comply with, for government entities to comply with. And there's no reason that they ever shouldn't, because we're just asking them that when you're going to make a decision, do it where we can hear about it and participate and know about it and think about it and present our opinions. And it's a little distressing to see lately, as you said, it's cropped up a little bit because it's not hard to comply with that act, but it's really important that they do.
Greg, thanks so much to you and FOG for not just caring about this stuff during Sunshine Week, and I appreciate you coming in to talk to me.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.